just looking at the spotting table itself. So if you look at it quite clearly, there are a number of things which are very advantageous to the way the spotter works. Firstly, what you notice that there are three guns at the top. These are normally used for cold spotting, as I would say. So what you basically have is an air and then a product on all three guns in the same way. What you then have is three containers, 1, 2, 3, which you can either put in water, product, and a different type of product depending on what type of stain you're trying to remove. So if you're doing wet cleaning, there's an opportunity to use products in that format. What you then have, the unique style of this spotter, is you have a flat surface, which is stainless steel. Obviously, like anything you do when you spot, is ensure that it's clean. Because if you leave any chemicals on it, you will transfer them onto the textiles that you have from previous. What you then have is on one side is a gauze. The idea of the gauze is to actually transfer product away from the textile itself. So a simple button by pressing it through holds the air gun down to it, so the actual fabric, and I'll demonstrate with the tissue, can be held very, very clearly on itself. So you've got a unique style. What you also have in retrospect is an actual gun, which is a steam gun. What GHIDINI have done for you quite clearly is opened a trough up. Most people will do that and it goes all over the place. So by having a container, you can control the amount of water rather than having it spread out in every direction. So by using the first pedal, you can take out most of the moisture from it, and then you can see quite clearly you get a good pressure level of steam that comes through it. So without doubt, you don't have a problem towards it. What you then have in the same time is a unique style. You have air which comes through it and just basically you put through. But what they've actually done with it is give you warm air. So when you're pressing, the actual chemical or the stain you have will actually break down much clearer. What you find uniquely about this spotter as well is you've actually got a funnel here. It looks very odd. Why would they have that there? Well, it's quite unique in itself, because if you've got very gentle garments, you want to dry them with a bit of warm air. So what you physically have, a button solution on the machine, pressing again the format that you have, and when it does so, what you get is air that blows through and dries the actual container quite clearly. By doing that, it allows the air format to give you a much drier format on gentler garments, as the case may be. So, that's the machine in itself. Let's look at some products and some stains that you've also come to see. Clearly what you have, simple formats of a stain. Typical one is coffee. This has been sitting here for approximately about a month, and you can see quite clearly it has a distinctive shaping to it. Any drink stains that you have will always come in this format, where you see a higgledy-piggledy sign on top of it, and the centre being very, very soft, as the case may be. So what do most people do? Most people do is attack it with a steam gun. All they do is attack it with a chemical. And unfortunately, either way, either will set the stain by heat, because you're cooking it, or the other thing, with a chemical, you're trying to remove the stain. Please stand, we're more than happy, it's all free. You can then sit with it and do. But basically, if you look at the stain itself, what it's really made of is just generally water. The product itself, or the coloration on a stain, is just very minute. So if you look at a coffee or tea, whichever you look at it, or beer or wines, the actual content of the stain is very little. The rest of it is water. So what you physically do is use basically the simple tools in life is water, and just physically wet the stain. What you're doing here is allowing the stain to lift off the surface, so it actually floats on the surface. Most people, what they do is do not give it time. It's any format, as our guy here from Christian will know, it's time. You have a sinus circle. So in that sinus circle, everything has an ability to work, whether it's chemical, whether it's temperature, whether it's a time process or the mechanical action. Here it's exactly the same. So then now you use a stain that is viable to remove. You have physically a number of stains which are important. Protein stains, which are anything that's in the body, which physically gives you the ability to remove things like blood, urine, excrement, milk, egg, etc. But what we have here is distinctly a coffee stain. Now, in physical terms, when you look at stains, it's making sure you're using the right application. Otherwise, the stain will be very difficult to take out. This is where you get the issues with customers. Again, the problem with chemicals, whichever way you look at it, are either spouted or they are cut too high. So what people do is tend to pour it, and you end up with a lot of chemical. It's no need for it. What you need to ensure, obviously clean your table, that's the most important factor of anything you do. Ensure that the nozzle is well proportioned. This product here, it's mine, so it's really good. So what you have is, you have a little cap on it. What it does for you is, when you drop, you have control. So by doing a drop at a time, that's all you need. It's not a need of spreading the garment on it. By physically just dropping it, you have to give it time. This is one of the most important factors of anything that you do, and not drop anything on the floor. So basically what you do is move it. You have two forms of tools. You either have a brush or you have a spatula. Most people who use spatulas unfortunately always use it wrong because we are rushing into it. So we always use the pointed edge and we rub it as hard as possible. This is the same thing as having a serrated nail. When you scratch, you lift the surface and you damage it. So why do that? And most people even use the rounded edge, which is great. But what they do again, they hold it like a pen and scratch. So what happens again, you damage. If you look at a spatula, the way it should be held is at 45 degrees to your hand. When you naturally turn it over, you hold it because otherwise it will drop. So when you do that, your finger sits on the actual end of it. This is your pressure. By using this and physically manipulating, like having a massage, what you're doing is allowing the stain to break away from the surface. So it's important that you do that. By just basically removing it, you also notice that anything that is water-based, which are these three products here, will cause an emulsification. That allows the stain to break much better. By breaking it through, and as you notice, I've only used a small amount of chemical. Again, the manipulation is in small circular patterns rather than a scraping action. By doing so, what you notice quite clearly is the stain is starting to... Physically again, make sure you wipe your table down. Use the vacuum part now, allowing the fabric to suck down. Just the base of air to break the stain through. So you can see if there's any movement. If there is, then flush it through. Whenever you're doing a dry cleaning format, always flush the stain through, because unfortunately a solvent and water do not mix. So you end up either with a ring mark or what I call a higgledy-piggledy mark, which is difficult to take out. So your more delicate garments, things like silk, viscose rayons, always end up with problematic scenarios. So what you do here is now, flush the stain out. Once you've flushed it out, you can see what it is. Then physically now, you put the air part of the gun. And you can see quite clearly the stain dissipated. So obviously there's time to dry, but I don't want to waste your time. But clearly here, even if the stain has been sat for a period of time, it's not an issue. You have to give it time. And this is where we find one of the biggest problems we have. Another classical example is ink stains. Ink stains are one of the biggest things to remove, or the difficult ones. Like everyone does, the first thing they do is to go to a bottle. And unfortunately, it's a sin. The chemical will remove the stain, but unfortunately it'll do two things. It'll also cause it to spread, and also make the garment more difficult. Now you have a big problem, whether it's in a pocket format or on a delicate garment. So, for example's sake, I will show you what happens here. So physically, when you drop something, you can see there's movement and it starts to spread immediately. And you say to yourself, how do I overcome that? It's quite difficult because I've used a chemical which I state, or a chemical company states, that it will remove. And it's exactly doing the right thing. It is removing it. But what you have now is the difficulty on the garment. Well, lucky for us that we have a product. And you think, that's not possible. I've been doing dry cleaning many years. Why is there a product to stop that happening? Well, there is. We've devised a product here, and what you'll notice now, I'm not saying I'm going to move the stain, but I'm going to say I'm going to do something even more different. Is I drop a product on it, And guess what happens? There is no movement. So if you look at that, you can see quite clearly there's a difference. So, well, what advantage is that product if it's not going to move anything? This is the advantage. When you have more lighter stains or more stains which are on more delicate garments, the issue you want is you don't want to spread. But what you want to do is allow the chemical to work, lift it off the surface without causing the damage. Because if it doesn't move, it's not a problem. The customer will be happy that it hasn't moved, but it's still there but lighter. But guess what happens now? Still, you can see no movement, and we've been talking, unfortunately I've been talking for half a minute. But now watch. Clean surface. The ink starts to come away. But I haven't damaged the garment. It's still in its same spot. So now you physically can do is move the stain through. In the old days, we used to have a product called glycerin. What we've actually done with that product is designed it to go in here. Do not be afraid to use the product again. By basically dropping the product again, in small droplets, you find you can move it. If the garment is very delicate, and you know this is a strong product, that's what it's designed to do, you don't have to use it. Because guess what? This product here, without doing any chemical movements, you will notice starts to break away. So now what I physically do, the same thing again, is break it down. And you can see I've nearly exhausted the stain. What I can do now is use the chemical. As soon as I do that, the beauty you find, there's no movement. It's still there. So now when I actually break the stain down through with my spatula, what you notice quite clearly, that again I'm doing the small circular motions of the fabric with the spatula and breaking it through, that the stain's starting to move. So to check the stain, to make sure there is some movement, what I physically do is just allow air to come through. So by doing that, you can see quite clearly that the ink stain comes on. So if you had a pocket that had a bleed, instead of going with the chemical straight away, by having a product that contains it, you can now save the garment and charge the customer well. So that's a possibility you can have with a product that's based into here.